Today on Locked On Red Wings, can the Griffins win the Calder Cup in 2025? We do a off-season recap and season preview with Andrew Rinaldi of the Calder Times.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. Scotty's also the host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And today we're happy to bring back our source for Grand Rapids Griffins news. That is Andrew Rinaldi of the Calder Times. It's been, since May since we last had you on, since the Griffins were eliminated in 5 games by the Milwaukee Admirals. Andrew, how are you doing, buddy?
You know, it's been a long off season, I'll say that. But I'm talking hockey in August. It's never bad vibes. So, always happy to be on here with you guys.
Awesome, glad to have you.
Source, our number one
source,
Griffin source, the official Griffin source of Locked On Red Wings for sure.
Gotta let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Scotty?
Game time.
We practiced this.
No, A, we didn't. B, at one point it became intentional where I just went, I want him to have this awkward moment, so I'm not going to say anything.
No, that's fair. It's Game Time. Also want to thank you guys for making Locked On Red Wings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It was last episode, Scotty. After the break, I told you got to say it in the deepest voice possible.
That's not practicing.
That was practice.
That's you telling me something.
Yeah, and a note for the future. Come on, brother. Let's go. What are we doing here? All right. Andrew, so now that you're back in full swing and you're now readjusted to our dynamic, I want to talk to you first and foremost about the offseason that the Grand Rapids Griffins had. There were some key additions, some nice additions to the Griffins roster, but also some key departures. One notably that I noticed is no longer listed is Joel L'Esperance, a guy who scored a big-time goal in Game 4 that kept the Griffins' hopes alive in the Calder Cup playoffs. Like, who were the big additions and big departures that the Griffins saw this last offseason?
Yeah, the big three I'm going to name off are the ones that the Wings fans are going to be real familiar with next year. Simon Edvinsson, Jonathan Berggren, and Albert Johansson. He's a guy who hasn't really shown up in Detroit a lot, but fans are going to get to know him really well. And those are, just kind of the natural graduations that go from AHL to NHL. But then you got a longtime Griffin in Taro Hirose, who's still unsigned out there. And, Matt Luff, who was another guy who's brought in as a veteran presence who has, again, he's still looking around for a contract. And as we get closer to training camps, some of these guys might be joining PTOs on some teams and getting contracts later on in the offseason. But the Griffins have also kind of plugged in a lot of holes there. Well, I should say, Steve up in Detroit has signed these contracts with these guys that are going to be coming down here with the Griffins. Two of the big ones, Sheldon Dries, 30-year-old center that has been over a point a game the last 3 seasons in Abbotsford, and Joe Snively, who is a part of those last 2 Calder Cup teams in Hershey and was just an absolute monster in the postseason. And I think those 2 signings, along with William Lagesson on defense to kind of shore up that, extra defender spot, and with, Edvinsson and Johansson coming up, plugging those holes in with those big veteran additions, I think really kind of shows that Detroit organization really wants this team to go even further in the playoffs than they did last year. And they're bringing in guys that are going to really make big impacts when the going gets tough.
Well, speaking of additions, I think one of maybe the biggest thing that this fan base looks at when they watch the Griffins are the young hot prospects that are coming up through the system and whatnot. So when talking about additions on this team, is there, because as you mentioned, there was kind of a I don't know, I want to say like a grad class. Obviously, that's not the right terminology, but like that got promoted, right? Like there was a solid all guys that are around the same age that all got promoted and are all going to be in Detroit this year. Is there some fresh, like younger prospects that are going to be joining the Griffins? Obviously, we get a longer look at Danielson this year, which will be super exciting, hopefully. But is there anybody that is kind of a new addition that's a homegrown prospect? And then on top of that, throughout the season, and obviously you're not you're not like covering the teams that are in Sweden or whatever, where some of the prospects in the lower levels still are. But is there players that maybe you have your eye on that could join the Griffins at some point this year as well?
Yeah, for sure. My big one for this season coming up is Shai Buyam.
Yeah.
With, again, the holes that are going to be there on defense, there's opportunities now for, he had one, maybe 2 games at the end of last season, didn't get in the lineup in the playoffs. And, well, you see a couple guys graduating up. Now is your chance to come in and make a name for yourself. And that it's a big opportunity. There's, besides Lagesson and Josiah Didier, Brogan Rafferty, every other, they also added Torridello, but there's a lot of youth on that blue line. You got William Wallinder still there, Antti Tuomisto. There's a lot of opportunities for these kids to really kind of nail down a role early in the season here. And, when you're looking at forwards, I get Emmett Finney, I know, is an intriguing name, especially as a late round pick, and have the way that he's been able to turn heads here again. Had his cup of coffee last year. Now he's got a chance to kind of establish himself more as a player. But I'm really interested to see Jakub Rychlovsky and to see what he can do coming over from the Czech league and lighting the lamp as many times as he did as a young 20-something forward. And I'm sure he didn't sign here just to play in Grand Rapids. He wants a shot in Detroit, and if he can come in and really kind of nail some of those goals down the way that he could light it up in the Czech league, I think he could be a really interesting addition here for the Griffins. And I don't know if they want to, like, at maybe end of season, bring Sandin Pellikka over. That would be my dream. But I'm going to try and not get too greedy here and say, like, we'll see him in the playoffs or whatever. But I'd love that. I would absolutely love that. I'm going to try and manifest that energy, but I'm not sure what Stevie's thinking. So I'll hold off on CNASP.
None of us ever are sure what Stevie's thinking. He kind of likes to keep it that way. Andrew, I know we're about 8 minutes into here. We're going to head to a quick break. And when we come back, I want to ask you, in the same vein as key additions and things of that nature, like, what player are you most excited to watch this year? It can be a prospect. It can be, your Joe Snively, the guy who's like an established AHL kind of star. I want to ask you who you're most excited to watch on the Griffins in 25 before we get to talking about the previews of the NHL or the AHL season. So stay tuned for that in segment 2 of Locked On Red Wings. Got to talk to you guys today about FanDuel. You heard us talk about it a lot. FanDuel, they're America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can get $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need to do is get a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. And just to go right back into what I was saying before the break, Andrew, a lot of prospects who are graduating. You talked about Berggren, presumably. Albert Johansson, presumably, definitely Simon Edvinsson. But that leaves room now on the roster for guys like Danielson and Shai Boom to get more looks. Who on this roster, including like veterans at the AHL level, are you most excited to watch this year? And give us a little bit of a reasoning why.
I'll give you a prospect and a veteran. I'll start with Amadeus Lombardi. I thought that kid looked great in the playoffs. I thought, he's got the quickness and the shiftiness. I think he just needed to kind of like maybe add a little more weight to his game and get a little nastier. But I think that he's really poised to have a great season this year. And really, again, the opportunities are all there for these kids to establish themselves. But just from what I've seen from Ammo's game, there's so much like offensively, defensively. He's just got that shiftiness. I mean, I hate making these kind of comparisons because then people are going to try and label this on the kid. But when he can sneak up behind a guy and just strip the puck away from him with these sick handles, it's very Datsukian. Okay, I'm not saying the kid's going to be the next Datsuk. I'm just saying
you heard it here first, everybody.
Exactly. I don't want to we're not having that discussion just yet. But but there's a lot of flashes like that in Ammo's game that really get me excited. And I think as he matures, as he grows up, as he gets more opportunities in the lineup, he's going to really show what he's capable of. And then when it comes to vets, I know I've pumped his tires here and there on this show, but I love Dom Shine. I love what he brings to this team, and I love what, how he sets an example on that ice for these guys. And that's what you need for those guys like Lombardi to come up and see what he does day in, day out, how he sets the example for these kids that is going to lead to great habits that's going to resonate success, not just in Grand Rapids, but hopefully up in Detroit as well. So Shiner's, just that heart and soul guy that whenever a teammate's down, he's got his back, and he's been getting better offensively. You'd think, kind of guys around his age in the AHL kind of plateau out, but his just been offensive numbers have been climbing steadily despite having these offensive prospects up there to take on those big roles and big minutes. He still finds ways to produce. So love me some Shiner. Love to see what he's got and to bring in for another season in Grand Rapids. And again, it's all about having that good mix. You get those young kids in, you get the vets in as well. And when you got the right mixture, the right chemistry, that's when some special stuff really happens.
I want to ask you about the goaltending situation really in the organization, not even just in Grand Rapids or Detroit. That's something that Brian and I have talked about a lot on this show, right? Like there are a lot of bodies in that goaltending room right now. And I think that will have a big effect on the Griffins. Obviously they bring in Campbell, but then you obviously have one of the more exciting prospects in the organization is going to be a net this year. Just kind of talk about what you're expecting from the goalie room there, and then kind of your takeaway from the fact that the Wings may have 3 goalies at the NHL level. And I mean, is there an opportunity? This is a question Brian and I get asked all the time. Is there an opportunity for Kosa to be playing in the winged wheel at some point this season?
Yeah, I think, from what you've seen at the end of last year to through the playoffs, this is going to be Kosa's crease, significantly this season. And they're going to want to get him playing as much as he can. If he can handle it, it's going to be his net, and the AHL is filled with a lot of back-to-backs, a lot of 3 games in 3 days. So he's not going to play every game, but he's going to be the kind of just the engine that really powers this team through. And when you look at it organizationally, early on, when the signing was first announced that they were bringing Jack Campbell in, I'm like, okay, well, it seems pretty obvious that Campbell's going to be the guy backing up Kosa. But as I dig through the formerly cap friendly, now Puckpedia numbers and all that, and we're looking at contracts and everything. I'm almost wondering if it's going to end up being Ville Husso, just because if you put that contract on waivers, I don't know if any team in the NHL in their right mind would pick that up, and it's just easier to maneuver for the Red Wings. They can still carry Talbot, Lyon, and Campbell up top, while it frees up some money that way. You can still have Husso down here. He's not, God forbid, with his injury history and everything. There's still, you got Gage Alexander, Carter Gylander, Jan Bednar. There's a lot of guys that are still that can fill in the role here in Grand Rapids as well. So it's a crowded room, but I guess it's never a bad thing to have options as well. I think no matter what, it's going to be Costa's net, and it's just a matter of who the numbers say is an easier fit to get down there in Grand Rapids to back them up.
Yeah, so when it comes to guys like Husso, I believe that there is a rule, like you can only get so much cap relief for guys. I think you can only get, it's like buried contract, buried cap or something like that. So if you were to send Husso, you'd still get like $1 million, 1.15, something like that back in relief. So like there is a little bit of validity behind that, where like, okay, you send Husso down, you get a little bit of relief, but that would really scare me if your goalie tandem is now Cam Talbot, Jack Campbell, and Alex Lyon. I still have more faith in Husso than I do Jack Campbell at any point. And we've been told that, not that you can ever trust a word that comes out of Stevie's mouth, that they still believe that Ville Husso is an NHL caliber goalie,
yeah,
and
the guy in the
very
highly of Husso, so we'll see.
But he also said he wasn't going to sign a goalie for a 2-year contract, and then went out and did that. So talking on both sides of your mouth there, that would scare me. But it is also a very distinct possibility. I want to ask you too about, we have already mentioned clearly about Simon Edvinsson, Albert Johansson, and Jonathan Berggren. Those guys seem like locks to make the NHL roster for different reasons, right? Like with Berggren and Johansson, they literally can't go through waivers anymore, without being placed on them. And then with Simon Edvinsson, he just is NHL ready. Are there any other players on this team that you expect to make their, NHL debuts, or I guess in Marco Kasper's case, second career game in the NHL level at some point this season?
I mean, you and I have talked at length about Carter Mazur and what he brings to the table. And I love, you know me, I love the dog in him and that he brings on the ice. And I think the Wings could use a bit of that dogness, especially maybe down the stretch, thinking around playoff time as you're fighting tooth and nail for every point possible in the standings. I've been big on Mazur since last season, and I'm going to continue to pump his tires. You've seen what he brought, especially in the postseason.
Oh yeah,
and that's we've seen it firsthand, so we know what it's all about. I mean, I don't know really kind of if Danielson's going to be down in Grand Rapids, up in Detroit. We got camps and everything and roster spots that are still going to be fought out. We've talked about Kasper at length. I'd say Mazur would probably be, number one. Rolling back on the Costa question, seeing him this season. I mean, maybe, but when you stack your goaltending room as they did with, Talbot and Campbell, and you still got Lyon and Husso there, unless you really think that Costa is going to be the guy to kind of get you to push in the playoffs or something, and that would be a really tough situation for Detroit. I still think that they're just going to let him ride in Grand Rapids, maybe a couple of games at the end of the season, but with a crowded goaltending room like that, and having to move contracts around, it just doesn't seem like it's in the cards. But I could be wrong. I would love to see Seabass in a Red Wing uniform.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing we're at with like Carter Mazur, right? Like as this roster is constructed right now, there's already 23 roster spots taken. So where would Carter Mazur fit as of right now? We think he's NHL ready, but like he's going to have to knock somebody out of a roster spot to get there. And he definitely could. Like that's why waivers do exist, right? It's just not really, there's not a spot being gifted to him going into training camp. He's going to have to definitely earn it for that to happen. We're going to do another quick break, and when we return, I want to talk about expectations for the Griffins this year with this slightly revamped roster with some graduations and new guys brought in. So stay tuned to segment 3 of Locked On Red Wings. Scotty, just so you know, I'm going to ask you to say the thing at the end of this, okay? I want to make that clear ahead of time. All right, here we go. Game Time has a fun new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And Game Time has a 50% off Labor Day offer for Diamondbacks and Dodgers as well. So if for whatever reason you're out there on the west side of the country, they're going to give you a 50% off for Labor Day. So that's a sweet deal that Game Time's offering. You can also use curation to make it easier to save more on sports, comedy, concert, theater, and so much more in general using Game Time picks. And all-in pricing allows you to toggle that nice little feature up front so you can see all the fees without any surprises at checkout. Get a panoramic view of your seat before you buy in the app as well with those handy seat views. And Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference with their lowest price guaranteed. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Scotty, I see you. That's right. I see you backstage just looking at me. You think you're funny. I knew that was coming. Game Time. He thinks he's so funny. So funny. Got a comedian for a co-host. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Andrew, expectations for the Griffins this year, where they lost in the second round against Milwaukee this past season, kind of surprised some people, I think, by the surge they had in December, all the way through to the end of the season. Are we expecting more of that, or are you expectations set higher?
Well, when you got the bit of turnover that they have, your number one forward, number one defenseman are moving on, but when you have as steady of a rock in there as Sebastian Cossa and that with, another year under his belt, given the veteran acquisitions, when you look at what happened in the playoffs, as much as I love a guy like Taro Hirose and what he's done for this team, he wasn't really doing most of his taco thing in the playoffs, and neither was Matt Luff. Versus you get a guy like Sheldon Dries, who's been a point-of-game player the last 3 years in the AHL, and Joe Snively, who, he's just got 2 rings on his fingers after the last couple of seasons. Not a big deal. So I would expect to see this team to, maybe finish right around the same spot. I don't know if they're going to be exact, the division winners or not. And thankfully, they don't have to deal with Yaroslav Askarov anymore in the division. So that's a plus, but Milwaukee's always tough. Chicago's going to be completely different now that they have the affiliation with Carolina. So you wonder what they're going to be looking like. And Rockford's with Chicago kind of in the dumps as they've been the last couple of years. They should have a lot of young talent in there. They could be dangerous. I'd always like to say Iowa is a bit of a sleeper in there, but the Wild, for as long as I've been on the beat, have been kind of in the basement, so it's hard to see anything from them. But you wonder what Texas is looking like with Maverick Bourque and Logan Stankoven, probably not going to be there next year. So the door's open. The opportunity is there for them to really be players in that Central Division. I think they're in a prime position to really go on a run here, and that's exactly what the Detroit organization wants to see, is these young players getting really big prime minutes in really big games.
One of the things last season that I remember we talked about when you were on the show was the physicality, or I guess the lack thereof, from this team. And when they were playing against bigger teams and stronger teams, they kind of got pushed around a little bit. Obviously, again, you lose your best defenseman, walks out and gets promoted. That's going to hurt that department a little bit more than maybe it already was. But also in the postseason, we saw them be kind of gritty and show some toughness there. So is that is concern too dramatic of a word? Is that a concern for you going into this season? And if it isn't, is there another area that you specifically are looking at on the ice and you're like, wow, they no longer have this, or they don't have this?
Yeah, I think in the Rockford series, they really responded to the Hogs' physical play extremely well. As in game 2, they admittedly kind of got their teeth kicked in. And then they responded to that by winning the next 2 games, knocking Rockford out. And then the Milwaukee series was just an absolute battle. I mean, between, Zach LaRue doing his just best Marshawn impression, which was absolutely infuriating, but you got to respect the game, and just everything that, Milwaukee threw at them, they took it and gave it back. And it took a really gutsy Game 5 performance by Troy Grosnick to really kind of quiet the Griffins in there. But I think they've kind of quieted those concerns of mine. I guess for me, it's kind of the replacing Jonathan Berggren. And it can be a replacement by committee for sure, but I mean, he led you in goals, assists, and obviously means he leads you in points. He was just captain clutch in the playoffs, and there was no other. Well, I wouldn't say there was no other guy, but when the game was on the line, he was the one who was like, well, I want the puck on my stick. He was like the Kobe, and it doesn't have to be one guy to replace that element, but when he's just such a big chunk of the offense that he provided, and it's going to have to be other guys in the lineup that help, pull the reins a little bit and step up. Cross Hannes' rookie season was filled with a lot of promise before he got hurt last year. Didn't produce quite as much, but can he kind of turn that around? Amadeus Lombardi, is he going to take that next step? There's what can we see out of Carter Mazur? Is he going to bring even a little more offensive punch? If Nate Danielson comes down here, what's he going to bring to the table? So there's certainly a lot of this can be answered as we get closer to October, but it's going to be a team effort more than just kind of leaning on Berggren to kind of carry you offensively.
But I want to add on to that Berggren conversation. But before we get to that, I want to say that you brought up Milwaukee Admirals and Zach LaRue. I want to specifically say what the heck. That's the PG way I can say it on the podcast, to Igor Afanaseyev, who decided to just torment the Griffins all series again. And he had a hat trick, I believe, in that series as well. And then he just F's on off to the KHL immediately after. Like, so you're going to just ruin the Griffins season and then just leave North America? That's not right. What the heck, dude? I took that personally when I saw that news that he was leaving. I was like, what the heck? Yeah. Come on, dude.
I at least
give us the opportunity to respond to that next season. What the heck? But regarding the Berggren thing, I mean, like, you're 100% right. He provided a lot of offense. He's AHL superstar, caliber type player. I don't know if he's going to reproduce that at the NHL level. He's already 23. I think he's probably a bottom 6 winger, power play specialist. Scotty and I have talked about that at length. But I think I'm a little bit more optimistic than you, Andrew, honestly, about the future of this team going into next year. And maybe that's naivete on my part. You watch this team and the league a lot closer than I do. But, you talk about the players that they brought in, especially like Snively, and you look at the fact that guys like Carter Mazur, Marco Kasper, are going to be going into their second full seasons as professional hockey players in the AHL, assuming they don't make the NHL roster. Like, that's another step forward year for me. And they were already very good last year, especially, in December when everyone turned it on, they turned it on as well. You get a full season of that, plus some, because you have to factor in hopefully growth, not regression. That could help replace some of that goal scoring. Nate Danielson, it might take him a little while to adjust, but assuming he does after a full off season, like, that could go a long way to help replace that production. So, I mean, on top of that, and the veterans that you mentioned, and hopefully maybe some minimal. I know I'm maybe this is why I'm a little bit more optimistic, because I'm glass half full with like all these players. But like I see a lot of potential here for, maybe they're not still Hershey Bears or a Coachella Valley caliber team, but make it another round deeper. They look poised to be a really exciting team this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't mean I just didn't want to come on here and make it sound like I was a complete homer. Like, yeah, this team's just going to run through the Calder Cup playoffs. I mean, there's a lot of really good players and good squads out there. But yes, I believe that with the youth taking another step and the additions of the vets that they got, I think William Lagesson. I covered him in Chicago, and he was a top line defender in Chicago. He split last year between the Marlies and the Maple Leafs. He's a very capable defenseman who might not have the wheels or the potential of Simon Edvinsson, but I think Griffins fans are really gonna love him in Grand Rapids. So, and in the playoffs, your most important player is your goalie. Now that Askarov's out in San Jose, might be on probably finish up the season on the Sharks. Dustin Wolf's probably going to graduate to the Flames at this point. I find it hard pressed to find another goalie. Maybe Jesper Wallstedt, as of course they're forever connected, those two, and that's going to be at that same caliber. And I don't know if Wallstedt's going to have the support that Kosa has over there in Iowa. So it could be a very, very big boom in Grand Rapids for this team, as long as everything goes according to plan.
Well, and then, as we all know, when it comes to sports, nothing ever goes according to plan.
That's right.
Scotty, do you have any final thoughts?
I don't think so, man. We ball.
Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. This was a really fun conversation. We'll try and continue our trend we started last year, having you on once a month once the season starts to get our Griffins updates. Do you have where do you want to tell people where to read your stuff and find your social media, all that good stuff? The normal stuff we cover at the end of an episode.
Absolutely. So I cover the Griffins beat, and as people might have guessed, the Chicago Wolves for the Calder Times. And we cover all AHL hockey, top to bottom, left to right, east to west. And for those on Twitter, I'm never going to call it X. It's going to forever be Twitter. I have my handle down here for those on YouTube. That's at GR_Rinaldi_. And I live tweet during the games. I give updates on the teams. I interact with fans. Even some trolls here and there. So if you want to know more about how the boys are doing, or if you're just bored at work and you want to get in an argument, well, I might be game for it. So I love interacting with the fans. It's one of my favorite parts of this whole gig, and thanks again, you guys, for having me come on. This is one of my other favorite parts of it.
Of course, man. So Scotty and I will be back on the other side of Labor Day, September 4th. Maybe we'll have a Monday episode. We'll see. We'll be back in September. 3 days a week until September 16th. September 16th, we kick back to 5 days a week, right as the team gets into training camp and preseason. So stay tuned for that and more. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.
Every day.